Oh yeah, okay, we're going. Hello everybody, I am your co-host and pop culture guru, Stacy Mora.
And I'm your co-host and fellow historian, Alan Talent.
And welcome to the Books and Baloney podcast, where we analyze pop culture portrayals of popular historical figures and blow our listeners' minds with the new knowledge we gain along the way.
In our first episode, we tackle the topic of Christopher Columbus and find out that he may not be who we always thought him to be. Joining us today is Hollywood production manager Hannah Bauer.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah and I'm currently a production manager on the new project, The Legend of Columbus, a feature film about the life, victories, and triumphs of Christopher Columbus. I'm heading the research end of this project, and so I'm excited to discuss and broaden my understanding of who Columbus was and what he stood for.
Cool. Well, you have come to the perfect place to continue researching Columbus. Before we get into it, why don't we get a feel for everyone standing on Columbus? Alan, what do you remember thinking about Christopher Columbus when you were in elementary school?
Well, like many American kids, I saw Columbus as a hero founder of our country that discovered the New World. That it was because of him that we have all that we have today. So I definitely saw him as a larger-than-life man who accomplished things that no one else could.
Yeah, I used to think he was a pretty important figure as well. To me, he was basically one of the founding fathers of America. What about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I think I had a very typical education of Columbus. I was in public elementary school with curriculum that simply highlighted his main accomplishments, nothing too in-depth.
So it seems like the man of the hour was presented across different elementary schools pretty consistently. It makes sense why a lot of people thought of him as a hero. After all, that was basically what we were taught. But nowadays, Columbus is seen in a very different light.
So, Hannah, what about Columbus inspired you to make a movie project about his exploits?
It's really been a combination of many things. For one, there's such an attack currently on Columbus, so that automatically made his story relevant to me. He wasn't the perfect cartoon version of himself that all three of us and probably most people listening might have seen at school, but I think he still is a prized possession of American history that should be treasured and represented accurately. Spain honors his legacy well, but America recently has just seemed to have forgotten the prized possession that he is to us. So I really want to tell his story in a way that might relieve some of the cultural, political tension around him and tell a really captivating story along the way.
Well, how far into research are you for this movie?
Did you know that Columbus didn't actually discover the United States? He landed in the Bahamas and some places in Central America, and he never actually landed in the U.S.
This is a problem that I have seen as a root to lots of the new hatred around Columbus. I thought that he landed in North America. What's up with that? It's so crazy how I still had this rooted belief about him that's so far from accurate. A follow-up question, why do you guys think we're so often focused on the negatives of Columbus as a country today? If it wasn't for Columbus, there would be no utilization of the lands of America. There would be no civilization, and there'd be no America as we know her, right?
Actually, the Vikings were here long before Columbus was even born. The Norse culture of the 10th century prided itself on exploration, and although their settlements did not last nearly as long, they undoubtedly arrived in the New World centuries before Columbus did. Not to mention the natives already lived here for thousands of years with their own cultures, traditions, and relationship with the surrounding area. To say that Columbus discovered America would be disingenuous.
Well, this is precisely the issue that I hope to clarify by producing The Legend of Columbus, but maybe for the worse. There's an online article called Beyond Columbus, Teaching the Lessons of 1492 that I came across a few years back and was outraged about. And after I read it and kept hearing more about the failures of Columbus in the news and in media, I knew it was his story I wanted to tell. The article was written for teachers attempting to help teach the story of Columbus more accurately. But more largely, it describes the shift in American culture in the last 10 years. It explores the way that Americans have looked at Columbus for the majority of history and the drastic change that recently has taken place in public opinion. It goes on to discuss the change and the beliefs it encompasses, that Columbus, quote, ushered in centuries of death and oppression to the people who were native in what is now American land. Do you guys think this is true? I know that he had to engage in wars, but was it really this brutal?
Well, I'd like you to hear this clip from the AHC podcast about this very thing.
Columbus's destruction of the natives was so complete on the island of Hispaniola that 50 years after first contact, their total numbers dwindled from approximately 300,000 in 1492 down to 500.
This clip details the awful impact Columbus had on the people who already lived here. Columbus committed terrible crimes against the Native American population that are still felt today. The article, Ethics and Responsibilities in Writing a Native and American Indian History, goes even further to explain how the actions of Columbus harmed the natives even after his death, and how people's refusal to accept his negative traits has caused a general reluctance to properly teach Native American history.
Going off of what he said, there's still a lot to unlearn regarding Columbus. The fact that people still refer to Native Americans as Indians is proof of how Columbus's actions are still affecting us 500 years after the fact. It's kind of crazy when you put it into perspective.
Wow, that is so far from what secondary sources have to say about his life. But even so, wasn't he primarily an explorer? Are you sure that the commentator isn't just choosing to dwell on the minor details, instead of rightly displaying the entirety of who he was?
Well, Columbus created a slave market out of the natives for profit, which fits the character of someone who has only made such a historic voyage for monetary rewards from the Spanish royal family. The treatment of natives as objects set the precedent for their mistreatment even decades after his passing. Children would be kidnapped from their families just to meet boarding school attendance quotas, and once proud Native American warriors were reduced to finding employment as mercenaries. Not to mention the atrocities done to Native American women as young as kids. The interactions with Columbus and his fellow foreign invaders led to rampant spread of disease on the populace, all because of this inhumane lack of empathy he had. But his purpose was a lot more power-hungry for someone who is often referred to as an explorer.
Wow, it sounds like it sure was. Why didn't I know about this sooner? The article I brought up earlier shows how this nuanced understanding of Columbus is the, quote, corrected version of the old one, and gives advice to teachers about how to teach what they think is real and the real and evil Columbus. My first response was that it was revealing the misunderstandings that modernly are accepted as fact, and belittles the accomplishments that we reap the benefits of daily as Americans. I now see why, in another piece that I found, it quotes college students saying that they had been, quote, tricked into honoring and celebrating this vile human being their whole lives. I feel the same way, but what about his importance to history? Shouldn't we still tell his story in light that he did in fact begin a new settlement in America?
I think we don't have to deny his importance to history. However, it is exactly that importance that has led to this idealization of Columbus as a hero instead of the reality.
Plus, it is kind of misleading to say that Columbus settled in America when he really didn't.
It's unfortunate, absolutely, that we live in a world where peace has to be accomplished by gruesome things sometimes, but that was the norm, especially in that day. Do you think there's anything that we are missing today that actually justifies his actions?
Natives to America have been forced out of their rightful homes to be placed in reservations that are only a fraction of the size. These reservations still exist today and are a painful reminder of how this so-called hero founder has done nothing but abuse the natives of the land that he didn't even originally discover. This kind of universal praise is not given to other historical figures who had a hand in so much death and destruction, so why would Columbus be spared from critique?
Yeah, Columbus definitely got off easy when it comes to his image. Usually we try not to glorify murderers around here, but Columbus seems to be a very special case. To all the people who swear up and down that Columbus actually discovered America are under the influence of false information. According to this World History Encyclopedia clip, the discovery of America was actually by a man named Amerigo Vespucci.
Since the 19th century, however, he has been credited with the discovery of North America, specifically the USA, owing to the highly romanticized biography of Columbus by the American author Washington Irving. Columbus never set foot on North America, and never claimed to have. The understanding that he did all comes from Irving and is a complete myth. Although the continent's discovery is regularly attributed to Columbus, it should strike people who make this claim as strange that it's not known as Columbia, but as America. The continent is named after Amerigo Vespucci, who lived between 1454 and 1512.
Wait, so Columbus didn't even deserve the praise that he gets for his accomplishments then? Why has he become the historical figure that he has?
The belief goes back to Irving, who wrote a really popular book about Columbus. Because of this, there are now some discrepancies in the way people think of Columbus. Living in this day and age, a time where information is now more easily accessible than ever, it is no surprise that more and more people are now unlearning some of the, quote, facts that they learned in elementary school and are now coming up with new opinions based on this newfound knowledge.
It's so crazy how impactful false information can be.
Definitely, and since Columbus is a person who was put on a pedestal of sorts during our early education, I can see why many people have such an affinity for him.
We still talk about him today for a reason. His impact on exploration and Western migration was significant, just not in the way I thought. This gives me a lot to chew on when we're putting together this film. I have a lot to consider now. This project might be more needed than I ever thought.
Well, actually, another crazy part of Columbus's actions were that they were pretty bad even for the standards of the time period. Even some of Columbus's fellow Spaniards were repulsed by his crimes. Not to mention the cruel human rights violations Columbus did extended beyond the Native American population and to his fellow Spaniards. It was recorded that Columbus once strapped a Spanish woman to a donkey to be whipped. His own government arrested him and put him on trial for his cruel punishments. The kind of moral people existed in every time period, even if the laws of the time didn't exactly match that morality. So it's unfair to say that everyone of that time period was just as awful as Columbus.
You have gotten yourself into quite the movie project, Hannah.
You're telling me. I still think it's important to keep Columbus's story alive and accurate because it goes beyond Christopher Columbus. Today, we're seeing people all over the nation rioting and tearing down Columbus's statues. And these sorts of actions are not happening to other figures, too. I hope that by revealing the story of Columbus truthfully, we can shed some light on other historical misunderstandings.
I think the reason why these people are protesting is not out of hate, but for justice. For some, mostly people from an indigenous background, Columbus is a symbol of the ongoing oppression they face. Although we have been mostly talking about how oppressive Columbus was towards the natives in the Americas where he landed, there actually were some protests that happened in Colombia last year where indigenous activists toppled a Columbus statue over there too. By the way, if you couldn't tell from the name, Colombia is named after Columbus, so the fact that he not only directly affected the indigenous people of Hispaniola, but also affected the indigenous people of a nation he is named after, half a century after his discovery, is insane to think about. History is undoubtedly written by those who have won.
Well said.
Thanks, I came up with it all on my own.
Well, I think we covered a lot of important history today. Hannah, do you think you gained some more insight on to who Columbus really was?
Yes, definitely. I learned a lot today. Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to share this information with a big audience in the film.
No problem. You're welcome back anytime you'd like.
Yes, and be sure to let us know whenever your movie is done so we can critique it some more.
Okay, I'll be sure to get you guys front row seats.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that's all for this episode, but be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms and never miss an episode by subscribing. Thanks for listening.
Tune in next week to hear us ramble about Thomas Edison and how he didn't actually discover electricity.
Wait, what?
See you next time on Books and Baloney.